There we go. We're good. All right. Good morning and welcome everyone to the Wednesday, March 27th, 2024 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, the Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Service Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. Our board actions today will be taken by roll call votes. For public comment today, after I open an item for public comment, those joining us by Zoom webinar can signal they wish to speak by clicking the raised hand button located in the middle bottom of the Zoom webinar window. If you are joining over the phone, you can press *9. PCTPA staff will call out individuals one by one who have indicated they wish to speak. If you experience technical difficulties and are unable to provide public comment during this meeting, please email your comment to solvisable at sabol@pctpa.net. Thank you. And Mayor Hedeshelt, will you lead us in the flag salute, please?
Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda today is roll call. Solvi, could we get a roll call, please?
Broadway.
Here.
Burris.
Present.
Cortez.
Here.
Holmes.
Here.
Howdesheld.
Here.
Joyner.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
Okay.
Thank you, Sylvie. Next item on our agenda is agenda review. Matt, do we have any modifications to our agenda today?
No modifications, Chair.
Modifications, thank you. Next item is AB 2449. Matt, could you please give us a review?
Chair, all members are present or participating remotely as advertised, so no action required.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next item is approval of our minutes for the February 28th, 2024 meeting. Those minutes were distributed to us electronically and also posted online. Is there any adjustments needed to the minutes that were provided? If not, could I get an action on the minutes, please? We've got a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any further discussion? There being none, Sylvie, could we get a roll call vote, please?
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris. Cortez.
Aye.
Holmes.
Aye.
Howdesheld.
Abstain, was not present.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next item today is our public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to comment on items not on our agenda today. If you wish to speak, you will be provided with 3 minutes to speak. And again, this is on items not on our agenda today. Is there anyone here in chambers that wishes to speak on an item not on our agenda? Do we have anyone online, Sylvie?
No.
No. Wonderful. We'll move to the next item, which is our consent calendar. These are items that are expected to be routine and non-controversial and will be acted upon by the board with one action. Are there any items on today's consent calendar that the board wishes to remove? Do we have anyone in the public that wishes to remove an item here in chambers? Online? No.
Usually this is the point in time in which Alice beats me to moving any items, but she's overseas, so I move consent.
We have a motion and a second to approve today's consent calendar. Any further discussion? There being none, Sylvie, could we get a roll call vote, please?
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Oh, gotcha. Cortez.
Aye.
Holmes.
Aye.
Howdesheld.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sylvie. Next item today is item H, the 2023-24 Overall Work Program, or OWP, and Budget, Amendment Number 3. And Jody, I believe you're going to present that today?
Yes, I am. Good morning, Chair and members of the board. I'm going to present to you, this presentation does contain 2 items. I'll stop in the middle of it to let you take action on item H. And to get started, we have a third amendment to our OWP and budget for this current fiscal year. There are very minor changes made to it, and the bulk of it were direct costs. We had a 75,000 added to work element 50 for a grant writer for a SCCP grant. State Route 49, which is a work element 44, the sidewalk gap closure. We increased expenditures for design and right-of-way consultant for 140,000. And work element 100, which is Sparta administration, we increased the expenses for the on-call consultant for $40,000. Salaries changed slightly to update with expenditure trending. And then here is just a look at an overview, how it compares with Amendment 2. We did increase federal funds for work element 44 for those, that increased $140,000 of expenditures. Sparta fees increased, and we have a funding agreement with the City of Rockland for the SCCP cycle grant. Amendment 2 does have a surplus of $184,000 and a about 15% contingency balance. And I will stop here. This has been reviewed by both Caltrans and the TAC, and staff recommends approval.
Wonderful, thank you. Any questions for Jody regarding the budget amendment? Questions? Anyone in the public here in chambers wish to comment on this item? Solely, do we have anyone online? Wonderful. I will bring it back to the board for action.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the amendment, number 3. Any further discussion? There being none, Solely, could we get a roll call vote, please?
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Cortez.
Aye.
Holmes.
Aye.
Howdeshelt.
Yes.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Solvi. The next item is item I, the preliminary draft fiscal year 24-25 overall work program and budget. And Jody, I believe you're presenting that as well.
Yes. So this is our first look at our budget for the next fiscal year for 24-25. These are the assumptions that were used to create this budget. Staff remains the same. 3% COLA was added to the salary schedule and updated PERS and STIRS contributions. There was a very small increase to our LTF. I think it was $26,000. And the big thing is we eliminated a few of our work elements. Work element 15, which was building administration. Since we no longer own Nevada Station, we have removed that work element. And with the assumption that there will be a ballot measure, we have removed work element 61, which is the funding strategy. And we did make one change on work element 33. We renamed it from bikeway planning to emission reduction program. And here is a look at the budget as it compared to Amendment 3 that I just presented. We have a balanced budget. There is a $100,000 surplus at this time. And then to go into the adjustments that were made, revenue, we increased for State Route 49 sidewalk gap closure project of $1.5 million of CMAQ funds as that project progresses. The LTF increase of $26,000, and we did eliminate the LTF contributions from our member jurisdictions for the funding strategy, which was a savings of $400,000 or a reduction of $400,000. And we will be using a bit more of the RSTP funds for our match for freeway service patrol for next year. And our expenditure changes, we will be conducting a triennial performance audit. The $192,000 reduction due to the SACOG MOU, which is nice to see that savings in there. And then the increased cost to correlate with the Highway 49 sidewalk gap closure project for right-of-way capital and utility relocation. And then again, work element 61 was a reduction of $962,000 of expenditures. And just to look at where our revenue comes from, 5.7 million of the 8.1 million of our revenue is on a reimbursement basis, which means cash is needed, and that ending fund balance is very important to be able to make those expenditures while we are waiting for reimbursement. And a look at where our how our expenditures are allocated. 90% are going to direct cost for our work elements, and the remaining 10% are the indirect or overhead costs for the agency. Now the busy slide that I always show. This is how our money is being expended by work element. See, 40% of it is going towards Highway 49 project this next year. And then here is our staff hours of how our 14,560 hours are allocated for the next fiscal year at this point. And that concludes my presentation, and staff recommends approval.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jody. Any questions for Jody regarding this item?
I do. On the revenue side, there's federal, state. There was a category called other.
Yes.
What is?
The other is the money we bill for Sparta, CTSA revenue that we bring in.
I'm sorry. Give me those initials again.
The Sparta fees.
No, I got that one.
The Western Placer,
Oh,
the CTSA.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I did want to note that Member Wilkins has joined us. Thank you, as has Sandy Amora. Thank you for being with us. Nope, that completely understand. Many of us got a tour of the domes before coming here, so thank you for being here today. All right, so no other questions on this item. With that, do we have anyone in the public that wishes to comment on this item? No one in chambers. How about online? All right, before we do that, I do just want to make a comment. I want to thank staff. The Freeway Service Patrol is always near and dear to me. I do believe not only does it keep our highway patrol officers who keep our roadways safe when we do have incidents on the roadway, but it also keeps our roadways safe for those who are traveling on them. And so I believe that's money well spent. I appreciate staff working diligently to ensure we can continue to support that program. So just wanted to note that. Any other comments from the board? If not, could we get an action on this item, please? We have a motion and a second to approve item I. Any further discussion? There being none, could we get a roll call vote, please?
Amara.
Yes.
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Cortez.
Aye.
Holmes.
Aye.
Howdeshelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Great, thank you, Sylvie. Next item is item J, the Highway 49 Sidewalk Gap Closure Project Update. And I believe, Rick, you're going to give us the update on that today?
Yes, good morning, Chair and Board. This is an information item. It's essentially a status update on the Highway 49 Sidewalk Gap Closure Project and kind of where it's at the moment. As a little bit of background, the project will construct about 2 miles of sidewalk between I-80 and Dry Creek, kind of shown in the diagram to the right, where the existing sidewalk is in yellow and the blue is the proposed sidewalk. You can kind of see in that diagram how the project fills in some gaps that exist in the system. And that's, you know, the intent and the real value of the project. It is largely funded with a $14 million ATP grant. PCTPA received that grant. We have been responsible for the design and the right-of-way acquisition. Because the project is along, state highway, Caltrans is responsible for the construction contract advertisement award and the administration of construction. So in terms of the current status, the contract for construction was advertised by Caltrans in the middle of January. The project does include what we call an ad alternative, which is an optional portion of construction. And that is done so if, when the bids come in, if the bids are too high and we don't have enough funding, we could remove that piece of the work and still have a contract to award. Kind of gets into some technical requirements in terms of contracting, and you do it this way and it allows that option. And that becomes pertinent in a moment. We did, the bids opened on March 7th. There were only 2 bidders. The little table over on the right shows the engineer's estimate. You can see there's a contract budget for $11.2 million for the construction contract, and we received the 2 bids. We were excited in the beginning because, as you can see in the green, both those bids came in under budget. Unfortunately, what we've run into is that both of those bids are considered non-responsive. The first bidder made an error. If you notice in the line for the ad alt, bidder number 1 bid $15,000 for what was about $1 million worth of work. The bidder recognized that they made an error and they requested that they had their bid withdrawn, which was withdrawn because it's frankly an obvious error to bid $15,000 for a $1 million retaining wall, essentially. And then unfortunately, what happened with bidder number 2 is Caltrans went through and did kind of the required review of those bids, and they rejected that bid due to what's basically called an unbalanced bid, as well as errors with their identifying their subcontractors. So in the world of bidding, one of the things they look at is unbalanced bids. And that's where a contractor will shift costs so that he's not realistically bidding the cost of some work. So if you're putting in pipe and the cost of the pipe is $100 a foot. Instead, you bid $300 a foot, or you bid $50 a foot, because you recognize things and you're playing with the numbers to make it to your own advantage. In this particular case, they bid over 20% of their budget was on an item called mobilization, which is essentially coming out to the job. You set up your yard, you do some paperwork, you haul equipment in, and that's an item that gets paid at the beginning of the contract. So you put 20% of your work into that item, you don't do very much work, and you've got 20% of the money under the contract. It's not allowed under the code to unbalance your bid. Caltrans identified a bunch of that, and they, talked to me about it, and it's fairly obvious. The other thing that they did was they're supposed to identify the amount of work that their subcontractors are doing. They have to do it in the bid, keeps them from making changes later in terms of how they're subcontracting. And they made quite a few errors in that as well, in terms of the process of how they did that. And so, unfortunately, that bid is rejected. So the result of that is that the project will have to be rebid. And so, working with Caltrans, there are some plan changes that will be made. There were a couple of addendums, and then Caltrans has revised their standards since that project was put out. So we have to kind of go back through that process. Expected to take a few weeks, and then turn it back into Caltrans, go through their process to review it because there's plan changes and specification changes. So we have a tentative schedule to go back out to bid in May, bids opening around July. So that does push our construction start basically back to fall of 2024. So that's the status. That's where we're at. I do note that with the extension of the deadline, we may need some more right-of-way easement extensions. So that will determine as we get closer to the bids and see how that goes. And that's the end of the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rick. Any questions for Rick on this item? Yes, Sandy.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I appreciate that update. I was just wondering if there's any type of, or any money from this grant program to facilitate some sort of, safety for the bicycle lane, like eyelets. You can put eyelets or make it I think it's a number one safety bike lane.
So the grant that we have for this particular project, the scope of that is set. And, you know, we basically got plans and that's done. But the program itself is a recurring grant program. It's the Active Transportation Program grant. And so it does fund bicycle and pedestrian improvements or opportunities. It comes around every 2 years to reapply for additional work.
So there's possibility in the future.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that.
If I could quickly through the chair, also be aware that we just kicked off a countywide active transportation plan that Corey will be managing. We just kicked that off, and we will be looking at sidewalk and cycling needs all across the county. So as part of that, what you're raising is probably something that would be good to consider as part of that work.
Great. Thank you very much.
So Rick, two bidders on this. Do we feel that the project is going to be challenged finding active bidders? And will we continue to struggle? Certainly, this has been a topic that's been discussed for years that I've had the pleasure of serving on this board. And I'd love to see these sidewalks completed. Just wondering what can be done to help us. Now, and I will tell you, anytime I see the notes similar to what you presented to us here, I get heartburn because I see change orders that tie right into that. So I understand why that is there, because that's exactly what follows when those bids are accepted. I think we've all experienced that in our service to our communities. So happy to see we're looking at that. A little concerned, two bidders. Is the bidder, I'd love to get $1 million wall for 15,000, by the way. So I've got some work to do at the house, send them my way. But do you think we're going to be able to secure more bids and hopefully higher quality bids?
You know, that is a concern. We had quite a bit of discussion about that. We were, frankly, we were disappointed that we only got 2 bids on this. It's a $11 million contract. It's a sizable contract. And as part of the process, Caltrans construction staff contacted contractors that pulled the plans but did not provide bids to ask them about, why they didn't bid, if they'd be interested in bidding again. They spoke to a few responses they got from one of the kind of well-known larger contractors in the area that pulled plans. Simply said it's basically an arterial corridor with sidewalks. They're complicated jobs with all the utilities, and they made a business decision that they'd rather concentrate on essentially simpler work. And one of the other contractors that pulled bids told them that they just looked at the job and they looked at their workload, and that they currently have enough work that they didn't want to, they just didn't feel a need to bid on that because they're currently busy enough. Whether that changes in, 2-3 months, it's hard to say in terms of what their workload looks like. I know that the 2 that bid, they talked to them and they are interested in rebidding. Obviously, we'll see if they rebid, but the one that was the low bidder was particularly interested in rebidding, so we're expecting that they will rebid.
And that simply could be, instead of it being $1.5 million, it was 15,000. And I know those type of errors occur where you get 1 in every 864 strokes or something, you make an error, so that could happen. So,
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm hopeful we can move this forward. I know we've had a lot of conversation, and Supervisor Holmes specifically wants to see this sidewalk done. So he spoke on that many times. So, all right, so thank you. Any other comments from the board? No, this is informational. Open it up for
Dan.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dan. Oh, sorry, sir.
Just a question on the bidder that requested to withdraw their bid. Did you have a conversation about whether or not to make a call on their bid bond?
So it was because the bids came through Caltrans, I didn't have those conversations, but my expectation is there's probably not a call on their bid bond because it was a clear and obvious error. So much so that the number 2 bidder actually filed a protest saying that they clearly made a mistake, which again, they also recognize their mistake. So,
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you. Good question. All right, so with that, we'll open it up to does anyone in chambers here from the public wish to comment on this item? Anyone online? Oh, wonderful. Okay, again, just informational only, so thank you, Rick, for the presentation. Appreciate it. Our next item is item K, the Western Placer Comprehensive Operational Analysis and Short-Range Transit Planning Project Update. And Mike, I believe that is yours today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members of the board. Mike Costa. I'm going to be giving a little bit of the presentation, and I'm also joined today by our project consultant team. Represented here is Genevieve Evans from LSC, who will be giving another portion of the presentation, as well as Eric Bird, who's representing WSP, also on our project team. So with that, I think it's appropriate that we bring this item back to the board as an information item today, because the last time you heard about this project was when you were approving actually the contract for WSP and LSC with the scope of work last year in June. And now we wanted to provide you kind of where we're at today and what we've learned and where we're going with this project moving forward. So the project officially kicked off and launched in July with our project team. And it's important to note that there's 2 components to this project, one being the Comprehensive Operational Analysis, or COA for short. That ultimately will result in a new service plan configuration or route configuration network for Placer County Transit and Auburn Transit Services. And then the second part of the project is the short-range transit plan, which will implement that COA service plan for Auburn Transit and Placer County Transit. It's important to note that Roseville is also conducting a concurrent COA effort for their network, and that will be integrated with our COA service plan and then implemented as part of our short-range transit plan. So the SRTP will take the Placer County Transit, Auburn Transit, and Roseville Transit COA service plans and configurations and then implement them in the next 5 to 10 years moving forward. The main objective, of course, of this whole effort is to create a more integrated and coordinated network of transit services here in the South Placer region among all 3 of our operators. Think of it as a one system, 3 operator approach. That is our ultimate goal. And mainly that's to address a lot of what we saw even pre-pandemic, where there was ridership decline, challenges with people using the transit network. And so we want to create a new network that increases ridership and ultimately improves overall productivity of transit services and operations here in the South Placer region. So where we're at today is we've gone through a lot of work effort so far with our project development team, and I'm going to explain a little bit of our stakeholder group in the next slide. But we have looked at our existing conditions. We've analyzed all of the existing conditions applicable to Auburn Transit and Placer County Transit, and the network and the area that those services cover. We've also looked at our demand for the services here in the South Placer region, and that includes all the areas that Placer County Transit and Auburn Transit serve, as well as Roseville Transit. We've incorporated that demand into our analysis. And we've started on the path of developing our network or foundation for future service assumptions. So how are we looking at performance of our network, and then what does that mean for the future network, and how are we evaluating our new services and considerations moving forward? So that's kind of where we're at today in this phase. Ultimately, we want to bring something back to the board with the draft COA service network in August, and then immediately after that launch our short-range transit plan efforts. And this does align with Roseville Transit COA efforts as well. So we should be at that right moment of incorporating those plans into our short-range transit plan as well. So as I mentioned before, this isn't just an effort with PCTPA staff and our project development team, but we actually work with a large group of stakeholders that are involved in this process. And those stakeholders range from our technical advisory committee, which has member representation from all of your jurisdictions on that TAC. We also have a specific TAC for this project, and that has members actually of the community, members from the city of Rockland. We have members from the city of Roseville even on our committee, and then we have representatives from all of the member jurisdictions, as well as some social service agencies on our project TAC, helping us to provide that input and that oversight of our service decisions and our assumptions in our planning exercise. We also have, of course, our Transit Operators Working Group, which consists of our operators and other social service transportation agencies that can provide input on the process. And then, of course, we work very closely with all of our transit providers, and they've been an integral part in this effort that we're doing to create this network. So with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to Genevieve Evans with LSC, who's going to share with the board a little bit about what we've learned so far from our analysis.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning, board. At this point in the study, we've put together 3 working papers, and much of that goes into analysis and review of what factors are affecting public transit demand. This is where we want to know what's changed in the last 5 years, what we expect to change in the next 5 years, so we can plan appropriately for public transit. And what we found, no surprise to you, I'm sure, Placer County is growing, particularly the older adult range, age 75 plus, 50, 60% increase in that population in the next 10 years. This indicates a need for more transit service and a look at demand response type services as folks get older. There's a lot of development going in, particularly West Roseville, western part of unincorporated Placer County. How do we serve this? Placer County is interesting also in that there's this really suburban kind of extension of Sacramento in the western portion of western Placer County. And this is where generally folks live, where there's higher concentrations of people who really need to ride the bus. They're transit dependent, but they may not have a vehicle. But then we have these rural areas out in Alta Colfax. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the rural areas have less transit needs. It's just the transit services have to be designed a little bit differently, more frequent in the suburban parts and less frequent farther out. The main factor affecting public transit over the past few years, as I'm sure you're aware, is the pandemic and how that changed how folks work from home more. This has significantly impacted our commuter services, not just the PCE Commuter Express, but all transit services. And we can go to the next slide. Let me get the next slide on mine. There we go. Another portion of the memos is a review of Placer County Transit and Auburn Transit. And on the Placer County Transit side, we found that the fixed routes generally serve those high concentrations of transit-dependent folks. Looking at survey data, big data, cell phone data, travel demand data, we're hitting those origin and destinations, places that people need to go. However, we could increase frequency for some of these corridors and extend service spans, maybe start a little earlier and a little later. And also we need to see how we should serve new developments that are going in. Go to the next slide. And also in these memos, in the third one in particular, there's quite a few tables, if you've looked at it, that get into the quantitative performance analysis of how all the different routes are performing, cost per trip, passenger trips per mile, per hour, per mile. Here's just a high level overview of how the different routes compare to each other. Route 10, 20, and 30, so that's Auburn Light Rail, Lincoln Sierra College, and the Highway 49 route. These do fairly well, so this justifies more service in these corridors. As I mentioned, Placer Commuter Express, Route 60, since highs back in 15-16, there's been about an 86% drop in ridership, so there's definitely need to be some adjustments, some right sizing there. One thing that we're looking at is coordinating with Roseville Transit, since they also have a commuter service. How can we coordinate, combine these services to still provide that connection, but probably at a different level? Granite Bay is another area where we could potentially coordinate with Roseville. Granite Bay Dial-A-Ride performs the least well out of all our services. It doesn't operate quite as frequently, but there's some adjustments that we need to look at there. And in the Lincoln area, things are growing. Route 20 is the Lincoln Sierra College route, and Route 70 is the Lincoln Circulator. So there's, areas we could maybe adjust the alignments to make times a little more shorter and more direct for folks. So those are some of the things we're thinking about. And then the next slide looks at Auburn Transit, which is a different beast. Placer County Transit is our regional transit operator serving all of Western Placer County. Auburn Transit just focuses on the city of Auburn. And back in 21-22, they changed their fixed route to an on-demand microtransit service. And this has been treating them very well. Ridership is up pretty significantly since the pandemic lows. We're not quite to where we were pre-pandemic when we had the fixed route, but very few transit systems are. It's a fairly productive service, as productive as it can be for a demand response system. It's just not possible to group as many trips when you have little vans going all different ways versus a fixed route. However, we are finding that it is more efficient than the Auburn Loop fixed route that used to operate. So we're keeping that in mind. Other things with Auburn is thinking about coordination between PCT and Auburn Transit, particularly in the Highway 49 dial-a-ride area. We're considering some options there. And the next slide, community engagement. This is just to keep you in the loop on how we've opened up to the public to get their input and stakeholders as well. There were 4 different methods we went through. Onboard surveys is where you get input from the people who ride the bus. We got about 277 responses on Placer County Transit, maybe 60 or so on Auburn Transit. We also did an online survey that's just distributed to a wider audience. That typically gets people who don't ride the bus. So we asked them, why don't you ride the bus? What would help? What would encourage you to do that? PCTPA staff did some pop-up events to reach out to folks, make them aware of the transit plan effort and get some input. And then there were also some equity focus groups to really drill down and get a better understanding of the needs of certain underserved populations. And I won't go into all the details. There's also another memo that has all the results from that. But the middle here, the top improvement requests, later and more frequent service pop up there as popular requests. And all this information is what we keep in mind when we go to the next phase of the study. And Eric will get into more of that with the service scenarios.
Great. Thanks so much, Genevieve. Good morning, members of the board. My name is Eric Bird. I'm a transition planner with WSP. I'm part of the consultant team that's supporting PCTPA in developing the COA and SRTP. I'll be speaking about the work that was done to analyze the existing network of fixed routes and on-demand services to determine candidate service improvements that we've grouped into service scenarios based on various expected levels of funding. Our work today is focused on the existing transit network, and in particular, the performance of individual routes and on-demand services, and identifying potential changes to service along those existing routes. The analysis and scenarios are just the starting point for the development of service changes in the COA, and as I'll describe later, we're now working on a wide range of service options that include potential route changes and realignments, coordination with Roseville Transit, and integration of the Rapid Link pilot project. As you can see in this graphic here on the slide, to begin the scenario development process, the project team first identified a set of goals, objectives, and performance benchmarks to guide the identification, selection, and evaluation of these potential improvements to the network. Following that, we assessed the existing network of Placer County Transit's fixed routes and on-demand services, as well as Auburn's on-demand service, to determine which services were either under or overperforming in various categories and identify improvements to make the network more effective based off of those data analysis results. Next, as you can see in step 3, we developed high-level cost and ridership estimates for each improvement, and then we grouped each improvement into one of 3 service scenarios based on the level of operating revenue, and I'll go over that in a future slide. Next slide, please. So the proposed goals, objectives, and performance benchmarks that were developed were based on the performance of existing services from fiscal year 2022 to 2023 and account for a number of items, including impacts on ridership from the pandemic. As Genevieve mentioned, ridership has dropped system-wide with routes dedicated to serving traditional 9-to-5 workers such as Route 60, Placer Commuter Express, showing particularly large and sustained ridership losses. We also took into account the diversity of areas that are served in Western Placer County and the different needs of those residents, again, as Genevieve touched on. To address this, we developed averages based off the type of service. For example, we grouped Placer County transit routes 10, 20, 30, 70, and 80 as urban or suburban routes and measured performance for those routes against the average of those routes specifically. We did this because if all routes were grouped together, rural routes such as routes 40 and 50 would not score well since those cover large distances and are designed to provide access to lower density areas. They're less conducive to higher ridership and also have higher operating costs. We recognize the importance of access in rural areas for basic needs and didn't want to penalize those routes accordingly when making adjustments to the network. We also developed averages for fixed routes and on-demand services separately, again, to account for the differences in purpose for each set of services. Next slide, please. So basically, once we analyzed the performance of the network, we developed a set of candidate service improvements. These are intended to either improve or potentially reduce low-performing services, or also supplement high-performing services that could see further increases in ridership with additional investment. These improvements were, again, based off of a number of factors, including the performance relative to the averages that I touched on in the previous slide, the fact that the majority of the county has a large amount of either suburban or rural land use patterns, future near-term developments within the county that may be coming online soon, customer needs identified from the onboard and online surveys that Genevieve mentioned to ensure that the improvements respond to customers' priorities, and also the fact that the county is growing and we want to make sure that the improvements account for this and can help increase ridership to make the network more effective. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned previously, as you can see here, these are the three service scenarios that the improvements have been grouped into. The first is the current operating revenue scenario, which does not include any added revenue or cost to the current budget. Improvements that were included in this scenario are incremental and aimed at identifying low productivity services that can either be reduced or adjusted to be more efficient. The second scenario assumes a 10% increase in the existing operating revenue, and this scenario includes all the improvements included in scenario one, along with some other improvements that, while are a bit more costly, are expected to increase ridership to make sure that if additional revenues become available, that we're getting the most bang for our buck for any investments in the network. Lastly, the third scenario assumes an unconstrained operating revenue scenario and includes all improvements from scenarios 1 and 2, as well as other improvements that would both increase ridership as well as coverage of the network to serve new areas of the county. While the scenario is not a completely pie-in-the-sky scenario, it reflects changes that are still relevant to the land use and densities of Western Placer County. Next slide, please. So as Mike mentioned, since the COA encompasses multiple transit agencies and jurisdictions, coordination between various agencies has been crucial to our process. We've had ongoing and productive discussions with Roseville Transit and their consultant team, who, as Mike mentioned, are developing a concurrent COA to ensure that we're aligned in what is being proposed for each project. We've discussed items such as how to integrate Roseville Transit's commuter routes and Placer County Transit's Route 60 between Sacramento and the western portion of the county. Lasting ridership declines for Route 60 offers the opportunity to work together to make the commuter service both more efficient and more useful to the public. We're also working jointly with Roseville Transit on ideas for incorporating the future Rapid Link pilot project. As you can see in the image on the right, the Rapid Link project has grant funding to provide service between Lincoln, Roseville, and the Watt I-80 light rail station. Grant funding is expected to provide up to 2 to 3 years of service when the service will be operated by Roseville Transit, and we're coordinating with them on how best to integrate the service with our upcoming service plan that we'll be developing. We're also working with Roseville to determine options for integrating on-demand service to both the Granite Bay area and unincorporated areas of Placer County, located west of Roseville, where we're seeing new developments coming online in the near future and analyzing ways that we can serve those areas. We're also coordinating with Placer County Transit and Auburn Transit to determine the best way to serve the Auburn area and come up with ways to improve the on-demand services that operate in that area. Lastly, we'll be looking at ways to coordinate with the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Service Agency to provide lifeline services to areas of the county that may be too far to serve with fixed route or on-demand services. As we move into the more detailed route planning stages next this spring and early summer, The interagency coordination that we've conducted and will continue to conduct will become even more important to deliver a successful COA. Next slide, please. So in the next slide, Mike will touch on next steps for the project, and one of those includes the next round of public outreach that we'll be conducting. As Genevieve mentioned in a previous slide, last year we went to the public and asked them to provide feedback on how they use the existing transit network and what potential improvements they'd like to see. This next round of outreach will be focused on determining the priorities of the public in terms of how to improve the network and how to best allocate finite resources. As we develop the draft service plan, these answers are going to be very important to determine how to distribute resources to meet the various needs of the county. As you can see on the right here, the graphic shows an example of something we're planning to include in our online survey. We'll be asking the public to use a set of coins to indicate which set of improvements are most important to them. And this will help establish the fact that not everything is achievable and we need to focus on what's most important as we redistribute resources. The results of this next round of outreach will feed into the development of the draft service plan. And I'll pass off to Mike to discuss additional next steps for the project.
Thank you very much, Eric and Genevieve, for your presentation. Just to wrap it up for the board, so you heard a lot about the work that we've done since we started this project last summer. And you've heard about the coordination that we're really focused on. We want to, again, make sure that we are creating a one network, three operator approach as we look at our services for the future of transit here in South Placer. So where are we going next? As Eric mentioned, we are planning to launch another round of surveying or outreach to the public, which will occur in May. And that'll be to weigh in on those trade-offs. And that input that we receive from our stakeholders and the public will then be used to feed into the actual COA route service configuration plan. So that's something that will actually start drawing lines on a map and setting up parameters for operations and what the network will look like. You will see that draft come out in probably late summer for the public's review, and then staff will be bringing that item to the board for consideration and final review as a draft in August is where we currently anticipate that process. And then, as I mentioned before, we then will roll into the short-range transit planning efforts to implement that service plan. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have, and I appreciate your time today.
Great, thank you so much. Any questions from the board?
Mr. Chair.
There you go. I need a geography lesson. What are the boundaries of the Western Placer? Comprehensive. So we know 49's in there. We know Auburn's in there. Does it go east of 49, east of Auburn?
I would say that the current boundaries we're looking at is the Alta Colfax area and everything west of that. It doesn't go east of that area.
Okay, thanks very much.
Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, I do. That was my question. So it will hit Colfax, and will it be more on like a dial, like there won't be like a fixed area for like Loomis or Colfax? That'll be more like on demand?
We haven't set those operational parameters. That's a very good question. We haven't set those operational parameters yet. However, what we have seen in the trends of services is that the fixed route services that traditionally had served Colfax and the Loomis area, actually the town of Loomis, haven't been as productive as compared to the other services or the fixed routes. So that is an opportunity to then look at, like you mentioned, some sort of deviated or on-demand type service. And so we are looking at that. But nothing has been set yet.
Thank you. Any other questions? So, Mike, just a couple things. The reference to the pandemic and working from home, I think the only pause I take when I hear that reference is the continued trend back to the office. I run in the mornings, and so I'm often over visiting my friends in Roseville because I've got some great trails. And when I'm coming back, 65, this is at 6:30 in the morning, it's bumper to bumper. I don't think those are people working from home. So I think we're continuing to see a trend, and if you stay on top of what's being printed, more businesses are looking, whether it's 3 days a week or fully back in the office. So I'm a little cautionary when we say, well, the work from home has really dissipated that need. So I'm hopeful. We're continuing to look at what those trends are and forecasting out as we continue this process. Secondarily, the integration of the services, I think, is probably one of the challenges we've had. 3 different services. It'd be like me flying across the country, and every time I went to an airport, I had to check my luggage and go through TSA. That would be a real problem. Don't have to do that. Ensuring the seamlessness of the programs so that it's as seamless as possible, I think is top for me. And then Auburn, fabulous what we saw with the on-demand service. That speaks volumes to the benefits and the potential. I'm hopeful that we're looking at the distance when those services are being utilized, how far they move. So how does that correlate to Loomis? How does that correlate to Rockland? How does that correlate to Lincoln relative to the... And Granite Bay, I'm sorry. The supervisor's going to hit me if I don't include that. So looking at those distances that are being traveled, I've always thought that on-demand is certainly a great solution. The difference between when I was in New York, of course, and when I'm over in Roseville, the different solutions I have. I can walk down into the subway in New York, and within 5 to 10 minutes, I'm on the subway on the way. I don't have that here. So that flexibility of the on-demand, I think, is important, but understanding also conceptually the needs, the benefits, putting up more routes from Lincoln to Roseville for those connections, fixed routes, when on-demand actually is a better solution and relatively similar costs. So I'm hoping that's going to be more what we see as this moves forward. I really appreciate the team, all that they're doing in the analysis. Excited to see this come forward, but really liked some of those key points that we saw there. So thank you for that. Any additional comments? Yeah, this is informational. Anyone from the public here in Chambers wishes to comment on this? Anyone online? All right, wonderful. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. All right, the next item we have is item L. That's the Regional Transportation Plan 2050 Round 2 Community Outreach Summary. And Corey, I believe you're presenting that today.
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much. Just had to do a little switcheroo there. Good morning, everyone. My name is Corey Peterson, and I'll be presenting this item to talk about the Regional Transportation Plan 2050 development and kind of where we've been at for the last 6 months. If you remember, about a year ago, we gave a very similar presentation to this and talked about our first round of community engagement where we went out to the public and asked them about their kind of general priorities regarding transportation. Would they like to see potholes filled, roads widened, more transit, more bike trails? This time around, we were a little more specific and asked for opinions on specific projects, which I'll get to in just a minute. Just kind of an overview, we had a very robust campaign. We did online surveys, went out into the community, and did pop-up events. We had virtual in-person workshops. We went to all of your city and town councils and the board of supervisors, and also did a project website and promoted it on our social media. So in terms of the online survey, we had a survey open for about 2 months that gained just under 800 responses. It was in English and Spanish. We had over 90% of the respondents come from Placer County, mostly from Lincoln. West Roseville and Auburn had the most responses. Respondents were asked to give their home zip code, which we were able to track, where responses were coming from. And like I mentioned, the respondents were asked to weigh in on regionally significant projects. Now, what exactly does that mean? We're talking like the big, priorities like 8065, 65 widening, Baseline Road, the Dry Creek Greenway in Roseville. So kind of these bigger, large-scale projects. And then, we divided up the county into 3 regions. So we looked at South Placer projects, and then Mid Placer, which was essentially Loomis on up to Colfax, and then East Placer in the Resort Triangle area, recognizing that the projects in each area are distinctly different, and we wanted the results to be compared against one another. So with that, I'll kind of go through some of the results for the South Placer projects and just kind of a quick interlude. When I say yes votes, what the survey did is it asked people to kind of interact with the map of these projects. They could click on a pin and then vote whether that project should be a priority. And essentially the survey was set up to where it was a yes or no response. So these are the number of yes votes for projects. In the South Placer region, this should probably be no surprise to anybody that 65 and 8065 interchange were very high priorities for the community, as well as the 80 and Rockland Road and the Capitol Corridor third track phase 2. In Mid-Placer, truck climbing lanes and Highway 49 widening very popular, as well as the I-80 Horseshoe Bar Road interchange in Loomis. And then in East Placer, again, truck climbing lanes were a very popular project across the board, as well as the Truckee River Trail there along Highway 89 and truck climbing lanes on State Route 267 going over Brockway Summit into the Tahoe Basin. We held a number of virtual workshops that we did back in October. These were done, we gave a presentation, had live interactive polling, and again, we were asking the community the same sort of questions that mirrored our online survey about which projects should be priorities in our regional transportation plan. And we saw most support for Placer Parkway and State Route 65 widening in the South Placer region, as well as I-80 and Bell Road, the roundabouts, and the truck climbing lanes on I-80. We also held an in-person workshop around the same time at our office up in Auburn. Similar format to the virtual workshops, we were asked the participants to rank the projects using an online Mentimeter poll on their cell phone. And then in this case, bicycle projects rank highly, reflective of the attendees of the workshop in person. It was a good, very productive conversation. We had a good group, about a dozen people that showed up to this workshop and asked great questions. We also went out to every single community in Placer County, hosted pop-up events in each jurisdiction. This year's Mike, he's at the Lincoln Showcase and looking very happy. It was a very good event. We have very good turnout. We've done the showcase 2 years in a row now, and we've had really good turnout and good feedback from the Lincoln community and also some of the surrounding areas, since it does have a regional draw. Through this effort, we were able to interact with hundreds of community members across the county. As I mentioned, we also presented to each of the governing boards in the county, as well as the Roseville Transportation Commission and the Truckee North Tahoe TMA board, and got good feedback from elected officials across the county. And we had a project website, promoted it on our social media. That was pctpa.net/RTP2050. This has been consistent throughout the whole project, and we really wanted to make it a one-stop shop for everything about the RTP throughout its update. So what's next? What does all this mean? So this feedback will help influence our RTP project list. Right now, SACOG is currently developing their preferred scenario, which includes a preferred transportation project list. Actually, hot off the press, we just got the draft preferred project list yesterday, and so we'll be reviewing that. We've also encouraged all of your staff to reach out to SACOG and set up meetings with SACOG in order to talk about your specific projects as project sponsors. SACOG staff is taking comments on the preferred project list until the middle of May, and they'll be holding meetings with jurisdictions throughout the month of April. And so we've been coordinating with SACOG and all of your staff to ensure that they set up meetings with SACOG and talk about their projects. This is information only, so there's no action, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you, Corey. Any questions from the board for Corey?
Yeah, who does our graphics? Who designs them? I mean, the content's the words, but who does the design?
Most of that is done by DKS, who's our outreach consultant, and then some of it I do in-house.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, nice, very clean, very inviting, great colors, and yeah, as I was watching this, I was thinking, who wouldn't walk up to see Happy Mike, right?
Right. Other comments?
Very good. I'll pass it along. Thank you.
Comments or questions from the board? I did want to note that I did see Mike smiling at the Auburn tree lighting and at the Lincoln event, he was over at the food truck for Roseville, but I didn't see anything for Rockland. So hopefully you're smiling when you're in Rockland as well. But I do agree. Yes, but I didn't see his picture though.
Hot chili cool cars.
Yeah, so.
And it was very hot.
Ah, that's what it was. All right. No, but that speaks to your engagement in our communities, all kidding aside. Thank you for your active engagement. Certainly thrilled that you're smiling there, you're happy to be there, and, but we do like to see you out and about and appreciate all that you do. Okay, with that, we'll open it up. This is informational. We'll open it up. Anyone from the public in chambers wish to comment on this item? No one in chambers. Sylvie online? No? All right, wonderful. We'll move to the next item, item M, that is traffic volume update. Again, Corey, I believe you're presenting that today.
Yes, I am. Good morning again. So I'm going to give a brief update on traffic. Traffic volumes is actually a little bit misnomer. It's more like traffic speeds, or really the state of traffic in South Placer and up in the Tahoe Basin. As a kind of a background, this is an item that was recurring kind of through the pandemic as traffic, traffic was starting to recover back to pre-pandemic levels, then took a hiatus, and we brought it back about 6 months ago with the promise that we'd come back to this board every 6 months and give just a brief update on what's happening with traffic in South Placer and up in the Tahoe region. So I'm going to go through some of the statistics for State Route 65 first. So this table shows the same data that was presented in the last presentation 6 months ago that compares June 2022 to June 2023. For this presentation, I'll be doing the same exercise, but comparing December 22 to December 23. So here's the AM peak period. This is from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. On State Route 65 north and southbound. So in this case, this is showing the change in traffic speeds year over year. So a negative number means the speed is going down, traffic is getting worse. If it's positive, that means it's going up. So for the most part, in the morning time on State Route 65, speeds are going down, especially in the southbound direction. In the PM peak period, from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., we saw quite a bit of variation. I should note that for State Route 65 Pleasant Grove, where we saw an increase of 18%, December 2022 was an unusually slow December. If you remember, there was a lot of weather happening in the winter of 22 to 23. So you'll see that there's a little bit of very unusual variations throughout this data as we go through, especially up in the Tahoe area where the winter weather was particularly affected on traffic. But for the most part, as you can see, there's some very large decreases in the northbound and southbound direction there at State Route 65 at Galleria. And we're seeing kind of that typical slowing of traffic on 65 that we've been seeing kind of coming out of the pandemic. These are some graphs that, we don't need to look at all the nitty-gritty details, but basically what this shows is that the peaks of traffic are not just contained to the AM and the PM peak hour. Now you can see over here on the right that shows northbound, there's a lot of traffic heading northbound, heading into Rockland and up to Lincoln. But if you look over here on the left that shows southbound, particularly at Pleasant Grove Boulevard, that traffic is starting at 6 or 7 a.m. and it's going all day, all the way until 7 o'clock at night. And I know that that Councilmember Broadway mentioned this, that it's already bumper to bumper at 6:30 in the morning, and it's lasting all day long. And that's something that we're seeing consistently across the board year over year. This compares 2023 with 2019. You can see in the green that for the most part, speeds have already dropped below pre-pandemic speeds, shown there in the red line. Now on I-80, again, this shows the June comparison year over year. Here's the AM peak period for December. Again, we're seeing a drop in speeds for the most part, eastbound and westbound at Taylor, Douglas, and Riverside. Now, of course, I'll mention that we had a fairly major project breakground on this section of I-80, so there will be some variations as well from construction activities happening on westbound 80, kind of in this area, and also eastbound, just east of each of these touch points, so to say. In the PM peak period, we saw some pretty drastic shifts in June, and seeing those again, again looking at the the variations where we had some areas drop and some areas increase a little bit.
Hold. You got some explaining to do here. How does a change in speed on westbound 80 at Taylor Road go up in between December 2022, thanks for turning that on, and December 2023?
No,
That really is.
It's a great question. It's one that I looked at the data over and over and over and agonized for quite a bit looking at this. So I think that the short answer is I don't have a great explanation.
Yeah.
The long answer is, you know, there's variations in weather. I mean, when you keep in mind that when we're talking about, you know, change in speed, you could be talking about, you know, it's already at 30, 40 miles an hour on average, and then it goes up to 44 miles an hour. That's not something that most people would notice on, you know, on the daily basis.
Right.
So even though it looks like a big number compared to the rest of them, you know, the actual order of magnitude in terms of the speed is probably not noticed by the average motorist.
And while the microphone's on, so is this for the entire month or specific days?
This is Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays between 4 and 6 p.m. across the entire month.
Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays.
And the reason we do that is because those are the highest traffic days. Right. So we try and eliminate weekends when traffic is irregular or even reduced because there's fewer commuters, or Mondays and Fridays because, again, traditionally less people commute, and even more so now with hybrid work. A lot of people work from home on those Mondays and Friday days.
And that eliminates the folks that are going to Dan's World on Friday, right?
Correct.
Going up the hill, right? Thank you.
You're welcome. So again, talking about kind of those peaks, we're seeing less of a spreading of traffic on Interstate 80 as we are on 65, but we are seeing kind of that PM peak really starting to become more pronounced, especially in the eastbound direction at Taylor and in the westbound direction, kind of in that Douglas to Taylor sort of stretch along Interstate 80. And then again, comparing the 2023, which is in green, versus 2019, the 2023, I mean, speeds have already far surpassed pre-pandemic levels, especially westbound at Taylor and eastbound. All right, so heading up the hill to 89 and 267. So again, I'll kind of preface this data with winter of 2022 was really rough up in Tahoe, and that drastically affects traffic speeds. So we'll see some kind of maybe unusual variations here and there in the speeds between December 22 and December 23, which was a relatively lighter snow month in comparison to 22. We saw the greatest increase at River Road in 89, where southbound went up 12%. In the PM peak, similar types of gains where again we're seeing speeds increase. But again, if we're looking at December 22, speeds were on average much lower than usual because we had many more days where it was snowing or icy. On Highway 267, oh, sorry.
Yeah, just quickly.
Oh, sure.
If that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. I was actually just going to make an editorial comment there. And I agree with your explanation. So in December of 2022, we had a lot more snow that generated a lot more skier traffic. And the southbound direction in the morning is where you see congestion as the ski areas are loading up. So that makes sense to me. And then the other thing that's happened is the ski areas have implemented a reserved parking program. And what that has done is it's pissed off a lot of the pass holders that now have to make reservations to use the parking lot. But it's also eliminated a lot of extra traffic on the roadways, because what it used to be is a mad rush, and then when the parking lot filled up, they had to turn all the people that there weren't room for back around and send them back up the highway. So now, because of this paid parking and parking reservation system that's in place, you don't have all the people on the road trying to get a parking spot that then aren't able to. So it's actually it's actually reduced some of the demand on the highway for people that ultimately weren't able to get to the ski area anyway in the past. So anyway, just an observation as to what's happening up there with the shifting dynamics.
Thank you. Those are great observations. And yeah, obviously with the parking reservation program, it helped to spread out the demand a lot as well. People have timed entries. All right, heading over to Highway 267. Again, we're seeing kind of a similar sort of increase in speeds in the AM peak period as kind of 22 to 23 with less snow and less icy conditions. And then in the PM peak, again, similar type of increase and some decrease in the southbound direction. I won't dwell on this too much, just to point out that the traffic levels, obviously in the Tahoe area, we're seeing a lot more kind of variation in speeds across the day rather than in the South Placer area where we see a lot of commute traffic and you see those really pronounced dips in speed at particular times. And you can see on southbound 89 at Tahoe City, there's a little bit of a dip kind of in the afternoon, but much more spread out throughout the day.
Ken, could I make one
Yes,
additional
sure,
comment? So is this the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday time period as well, Corey?
No, thank you for asking. This is actually weekend data.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah, and I think that's very appropriate because that's where you're catching the peak demand period up there on
Correct.
the weekends.
And then comparing 2023 to 2019, again, variations in traffic levels where, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic kind of vary in terms of the speeds. On 267, there's a little bit more of a pronounced dip in the afternoon in northbound Truckee Airport Road. Otherwise, we're seeing a lot of the same where it's varied across the different time periods. And again, in 2023, much more pronounced dip on 267 northbound at Truckee Airport Road versus pre-pandemic. So it's a lot of data, but I'll just kind of summarize and say that overall we're seeing a lot of reductions in traffic speeds on 80 and 65 between the two months year over year. And, in some cases where there are small percentages, they do, as long as we keep seeing a reduction in traffic, those percentages will continue to add up. And like I said, there were some, anomalies, some big increases, some big decreases, possibly due to the weather, varying conditions. Another thing is that December has, the holiday season. A lot of people have irregular travel patterns. They're traveling to see family, they're shopping. So there's a lot of, different variations that we see in December travel versus summer travel. Again, there's no action on this, but I'm happy to take any additional questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that presentation, Corey. Any questions for Corey?
I just have a comment. I have 3 occasions to go to Rockland across from William Jessup University where Atherton and Menlo are. And when I go down from Auburn to Sunset, I go down 65 north and take Sunset. But in the afternoon, when I leave, I go up Sunset to 80. So and I stop and shop in Rockland.
Thank you for that.
Just let you know. But anyhow, that's with the traffic going southbound in the afternoon, it's just almost. So anyhow, I just wanted to give you a little personal update on my travels. And that concludes my comments.
All right. Thank you, sir. Any other comments? And that certainly speaks to the arterial compression that we experienced due to the impacts you showed. And thank you for putting this together. I know I was one who was asking for this. I think we need regular updates so we can understand it. I think about our friends in Lincoln and what they're experiencing on that 65 corridor because they have a much longer period of time. Supervisor Holmes speaking to the Sunset exit, but you take that out to 12 Bridges and then out past that out to Ferrari Ranch. I mean, you really have a trek to get in. So, all right. So with that, this is informational. We'll open it up. Anyone from the public hearing chambers wishes to comment on this item? There being no one, anyone online? All right, great. Thank you again, Corey, for the presentation. Appreciate it. Next item is item N. It's the Executive Director's Report. Matt?
Thank you, Chair. Just a few items of update. Thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the activities since last we got together. On March 1st, I attended the CTC, the California Transportation Commission Road Usage Charge, TAC, or Technical Advisory Committee. And you've probably heard me speak before a couple of times about the fact and we heard this last night when we were in Lincoln about are there other ways we're going to look to fund transportation in the future. And Caltrans, through the CTC, has been looking at road usage charging for more than a decade now. So I have been monitoring that technical advisory committee just to understand how it might affect our activities into the future. Attended that meeting on March 1st. It was the board, staff, myself, and one citizen, right? And so I would say that while the road usage charge TAC continues to do their work, I don't foresee anything evolving out of this activity in the next 5 to 10 years. And it's just something we're going to continue to monitor as part of the work we do and also part of our work as a non-voting member of CARTA, just to understand where the state is with their activities. Rick and myself on March 11th went up to Colfax to have a meeting with Ron Walker, the new city manager, just to introduce ourselves to Ron. He met us, I think, virtually through attendance, but we had a nice meeting and lunch with Ron just to kind of give him a PCTPA 101, let him know what we do and how he can participate. So that was just really nice to help onboard Ron and have an opportunity to talk with him one-on-one. Of course, you know this. Chair Broadway gave a great presentation at PCAR, a presentation on PCTPA on the 19th of March to a few hundred people, I would say, which was in the audience, and had to do 20 or 30 minutes on Rockland and then turn around and do another 25 minutes about PCTPA and our upcoming measures. So thank you for that. We got a lot of good questions, and they're always a great audience. Corey kicked off his countywide active transportation planning project on the 20th with the consultant team, which includes Kittleson, Mark Thomas, and AIM Consulting. We're really, really excited about that. You know, I think lots of times, and again, we hear this, we are in a part of the world where we are very auto dependent. We have a robust highway network that we have to focus on, but we also do care about increasing our mode split. You already heard from Mike and his team about all the work that they're doing in transit. So, you know, we want to, you know, give people high quality transit. And we also want to, of course, you know, invest in our sidewalks and our active transportation. So this is a really exciting project that, you know, as an outcome will lead to us going from a programmatic understanding of, hey, active transportation is important to an actual project list that will be quantified and data driven. We'll have methodology to say, you know, these are the ATP projects inside of our county that have really, you know, a lot of value for our residents. So we're super excited about that work. Last week, I attended a one-day tour of Tahoe with the new Public Works Director for Placer County, Derek Gady, and that was nice because it also gave me a chance to spend some more time in the eastern part of the county. I've spent some time there, but not as much as I should, and so it gave me a good understanding of some of the, you know, transportation issues they have there. So just a little snapshot of some of what's been going on since last month. I will point out that the big thing is we're going through our expenditure plan presentations with all 6 municipalities and the board. We were in Roseville on the 20th. The expenditure plan was approved unanimously. We were at Lincoln last night. The expenditure plan was also approved unanimously. April 9th will be a big day. We'll be in front of the Board of Supervisors and at Rockland and Loomis. All at the same time, and then in Colfax on the 10th and up in Auburn on the 22nd. And just as a reminder then, when we come back to this board next month in April, assuming that everything goes well with our expenditure plan presentations and votes, we'll be asking for a first reading of the ordinance. We'll then have a second reading of the ordinance in May. So we're well underway in all of that to go through all of the votes and stage gates that we need to in order to put a ballot, a measure on the November ballot. And just lastly, Cap to Cap. I know some of you will be in attendance to Cap in DC. We are planning on Sunday to do another federal briefing with our federal advocacy consultant, TFG, at their offices. We'll make you aware of that and make sure we get that on everybody's calendar. It's going to be from 11:30. Actually, it is on the calendar. That's right. That got sent out yesterday. That's going to be from 11:30 to 1:30 at TFG's offices in DC. It's about a half mile from the conference hotel. We'll arrange a shuttle just like we did last year. There'll be transportation. So looking forward to that. For those of you who will be a first-time attendee, I think you'll find Mike Miller of TFG very engaging, and we can talk a lot about transportation. We may get a brief presentation from one of his colleagues on broadband, because there certainly is an infrastructure application to that and potential federal grant opportunities around broadband that we're just beginning to explore. And then just, what's going on in DC. Sometimes it's just fun to hear from the experts, and who knows what will be happening by the time we get there. Those are the end of my remarks.
Great, thank you. Any comments
Yeah,
in relationship to the
Mr.
remarks?
Chair, thank you for your presentation on the 20th. Excellent, well received. You answered some questions that certainly weren't germane to the topic, but important, right? So thanks for that. Last week at the SACOG board, they were in Woodland, and we had a part of their morning session was on their active transportation plan. And if you've been to Yolo County, you know Davis, you know Woodland, but their active transportation plan is trying to get to Madison and Esparto and Winters, very very separated communities from there. I did, when we had, and this wasn't on yours, my other question is, in baseball terms, you have split squads in spring training. Is that what you're going to do on April 9th, or are you timing it with Chair Broadway to make sure that you're not in Loomis when he wants you to be in Rockland?
Very, very fair question, and we are doing a split quad. The great thing about this team is we've got a bunch of A players, and if you noticed,
absolutely.
Last week the River Cats beat the Giants.
A couple of times, yeah.
Yeah, so what we're going to be doing there, and we would have loved to have not run to that, but it's all about logistics and what we've got to do. So I will be in Rockland, and Mike Costa will be in Loomis. And if we can get through Rockland and I can, jump over to Loomis, I will do that. But we will have Mike, Deanne, and Rick in Loomis with all of them. So that's going to be our split squad strategy on the night of the 9th.
And the last thing, so we're on our social media. Well, I think we call it Transportation 360, advertising for comments and input on that. And then yesterday, we got a briefing, and we've broken ground on the bus charging station at the Galleria for Rapid Link.
Excellent.
Okay. Amanda?
Yeah, I have a quick question, and so I'm just now connecting all the dots. So please forgive me if this is something that I should have already understood, but last week I was in Burbank for the League of Cities. I'm on that transportation policy committee, and they were talking about, the VMT and the gas tax, all the different things, right? But that they were saying that there's already a road charge pilot happening here. Is that the same as this?
It is. It is the same as the CTC road usage charge, and there is a pilot, and understand that there is a lot of policy issues about how much should we charge, when should we charge, where should we charge, what about equity, what about rural equity with people who have heavier vehicles that drive longer distances? Should we charge them more than people who are only going 3 miles, but they're doing that in an urban setting, sitting in traffic, right? So there's a lot of that policy stuff to work out. There's also the technology. How are we going to track this? Are we going to have a little thing that plugs into, that tracks you in real time in your car? Or might you just get a bill at the end of the year from the DMV when you go to register, and you pay that quarterly. So how are we going to actually affect this? So there's policy considerations and technical ones. The CTC has a large, they have a large, job in front of them to sort of take this on. I will say that this next phase of the pilot that they're going forward, they're trying to recruit people to participate. They're actually trying to actively recruit CTC employees and members of the legislature and others to get them informed. Oregon did this almost a decade ago. We'll call it 8 or 9 years ago, right? The thing is with the pilot is no real money is being exchanged. So it's meant to be informational and instructive, but no one is saying, in lieu of my state gas tax, I will not pay that, and instead I will give you a credit card and I will pay this road usage charge. That's when you would actually get a financial exchange and a pilot of that nature. That's where they would go next in 5 or 6 or 7 years. So there is an active pilot. I would say it's more like theoretical. Yes, I would say it's exploratory. Theoretical is a good word, and it's a first step. So it's what they have to do. There'll be a lot of conversation around it, but it is the very opening stages. And even Oregon, who I would say is a decade ahead of California, still isn't at a point that there is a true exchange of dollars where instead of them paying the Oregon state fuel tax, they're paying this road usage charge in Oregon. There's a lot of conversation about it. One of the biggest ones, and when I was at TRB in January, I attended a freight workshop on road usage charging and freight. And understand that this is not, we always think about it as the commuter, but there's all the truckers, there's all the freight distribution, and they would be subject to this. In California, though sometimes it thinks it's an island, is not. It's connected to the continental United States. And so trucks come west, right? And you might be surprised to learn that of all of the trucking companies that are out there that move all of this freight, that 80% of what's in this room came on a truck, the vast, vast majority of that is from small trucking companies, not UPS, not Yellow.
Oh, yeah.
So does anybody want to garner a guess as to the percentage of small trucking companies, which is 10 or fewer trucks, is all of trucking companies in the U.S.? It's over 99%. So 99% of trucking is all these small mom and pop shops. This has got to figure out, how do those trucking companies do business in California through to Utah all the way? So the truth is, California can't go this alone. They're going to need some sort of federal cooperation and some federal standard, which the feds have not yet undertaken. So I've gotten really long-winded here, but it's a great question. There's a lot being discussed, but I would say it's very early days.
Okay, because according to their chart, there are 3 states already that are on voluntary road charge programs, and I think Oregon is one of them. And then there's one that's already mandatory. So anyways, there was a lot of discussion, right, that was saying like, okay, well, just like we were talking about when you go across state lines, like, so then are we paying Texas and, you know what I mean? There's so many different variations. And
Absolutely.
then obviously not trusting the government to say, okay, well, we're not going to have the gas tax, but then they end up still taxing us that, but just calling it something else. You know what I mean? There was a lot of discussion in that policy committee. So anyways, I just wanted to know if that was the same thing that we were talking about, if you were aware that there was a pilot program, because I kind of, until I was looking at this, I wasn't connecting that those were the 2 same things that we were talking about. So anyway, okay, well, thank you so much.
It's perfect. You're exactly right. And we are monitoring it, and it's Oregon, and the other one's Hawaii, because it's pretty easy to do it in Hawaii. They have interstates there.
Are they connected to the United States?
They have 2 interstates in Hawaii. But yeah, and we are watching it.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, great. Any other
have a
questions?
quick question.
Yes, Ann.
I probably should have asked this question earlier, but with regard to the congestion on 80 and 65, have we looked into carpool lanes, the use, whether or not is effective or not, and the misuse of carpool lanes?
Well, we have, Caltrans have, and it continues to be a conversation. And I would, if I one of the reasons, Star Trek was so innovative back in the 60s is everything that they talked about and the issues they took on were really far, far away, right? And so they could take these on. So if I could take it out of our county and just talk about statewide, far, far away, violation in the carpool lanes is 35 to 40% statewide. It's very, very high, and especially in those parts of the state where they went from HOV 2 to 3. Because HOV experts, I'm not one, I know a bit about it, will tell you that trying to form a 3-person carpool and maintain that carpool over time is extremely difficult. And so when you might roughly have an ability to have 25 or 30% HOV2, when you make that HOV3, it drops to single digits and sub 5%. I tell you that to say those people who were in a legal HOV2 carpool feel justified in violating HOV3. They feel like this was unjust to me, and you see the violations go way up. So in and around the Bay Area, where they have a very robust HOV network, those violations are 35 to 40%.
Wow.
I would say on I-80, they're very similar to that. If you want to know a little secret, the way they collect that data is they hire grad students to hang out on bridges, and they look in the cars and they count. Because there's no other way. There's no other way to do it. It's, so it's imperfect, but it's how, and as a, young person out of grad school, I had that clicker in my hand. So I've done that work. But if you routinely look at it, violation is a third to 40%. And unless you're going to get to a point where you actually have physical barrier separation or delineation, which California does not do, we believe in a concept called open access, you'll continue to see those violation rates.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? All right, anyone from the public wish to ask a question or comment on the executive director's report? No one in chambers, anyone online? All right, thank you, Matt. All right, with that, we had informational items included in our packet, the TAC reports and status reports. Those were available for review. And with that, our next meeting will be Wednesday, April 24th. And other than that, for those that are traveling to Washington, safe travels. I will not be joining you this year, so apologize, I'll miss that.
You're not going to run down?
I'm not going to run down.
You're not going to run down?
No, I'm going to be saving the legs for the next day. All right, so with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
The train comes.
It